as I've gotten older, I really sort of have come to terms with the fact that I really do think the devil is a pervert. And what I mean by that is that he will take what is good and then turn it into something that isn't good. And you have to be careful of what you throw away because of the devil's perverted nature. And so I remember I was thinking about generosity, right? Because I realized that a lot of people who are very generous, they also tend to have a habit of being an overspender, a careless spender. And I realized that that was a perversion, right? Because the enemy basically he would see that somebody would be a cheerful giver. They would maybe give to a homeless person or, tithe every Sunday or whatever. And then he will corrupt that or pervert that into being a waster. And so what can end up happening is that, let's say the enemy takes your God-given gift of generosity and perverts it into a gambling addiction, or he perverts it into being, a retail therapist where you just splurge on shopping. If you're not careful, the enemy will tell you, stop spending money, period. That's how you're going to fix your problem. If you do that, you might stop giving to people in need. You might stop giving offerings and tithes, and he'll just kind of convince you that you need to just stop spending altogether, right? When it's really, he's taken the good, which is the generosity, and he's perverted it into something that is not good, right? And so you have to kind of have the discernment to understand, okay, do I completely throw this entire thing away, or do I have to draw a line between being generous, being a cheerful giver, and then being wasteful and not knowing how to budget or steward finances properly, right? Another form of perversion that I really do think is quite prevalent today is the difference between love and lust. And it's kind of funny that we have to even draw a line between the two, because when you actually understand what love is, it is not even in any way, shape, or form comparable to love. They're two completely different things. Lust at its core is a very violent demon that wants what it wants. It's a covetous spirit. That's what lust is, right? You could take this cologne, right? Lust will say, I want this, and it doesn't care about what the cologne has to say. It doesn't care about the preferences, needs, and desires of the cologne. It just wants it. Love, on the other hand, is a selfless spirit. You can read 1 Corinthians 13. And so what I've observed is that if an individual is a very loving person, right? They don't seek their own. They're slow to anger. They are selfless. The highest form of love being a sacrificial love in which you would give up your life for a friend. The enemy will take that and turn it into covetousness, lust, right? And so what can end up happening, you have a lot of people that will then kind of fall into sexual immorality, and then their response will be to be cold, right? Because they're so afraid of falling into lust that they basically start to show no emotion. They become cold, heartless. They don't look people in the eye. They avoid everybody, and they, as many would say, are cold-blooded, or their heart's on ice. But it's what they're really trying to do is they're so afraid of falling into lust that they haven't drawn that line between love and lust, because as far as they're concerned, lust is a very passionate feeling. And so for them, love is also a very passionate feeling, right? And so because they don't ever want to feel anything that would even remind them of that feeling of lust, because oftentimes a person that's bound by a sexually immoral spirit, they're not able to draw the difference. They're not able to draw a line between love and lust. And so they end up just cutting off all emotion together, period. Right? I've seen this happen for a lot of people. And so you have to, again, have the discernment to draw that line, because what you don't want to do is become an emotionally unavailable, an avoidant, hostile individual out of your fear of falling into lust. You have to draw that line. You have to draw a line, right? Because the reality, ladies and gentlemen, is the enemy being a pervert. If you read Proverbs 5, verses 18 and 19, right? It's basically saying that you should have a very vibrant, healthy relationship within the confines of marriage if you're married, right? The enemy will take what God intended to be the standard of a marriage relationship relationship, and he'll try to make you try to experience that outside of marriage, which is basically what fornication is. And then in your attempt to never fall into fornication, you'll never want to feel love again, when it's like the love that is listed in Proverbs or even in the Song of Solomon is okay within the confines of marriage. The enemy will pervert that, make you experience a love that was only supposed to be experienced in marriage. He'll make you experience that outside of marriage. And then now you're just afraid of feeling love ever again, when there's a line that you have to draw. Right? Because being, let's say, affectionate towards someone is not bad if you are married to them, but the enemy will have you experience that affection outside of marriage and then convince you that all affection is bad, when that's not the case. That's why I say the enemy's a pervert, because it's like he will take something that is good, misconstrue your perception of what it is, and then convince you that the entire thing is bad. Just throw it all away, right? Another one that I can think of is long suffering. Right, long suffering is essentially someone that knows how to turn the other cheek, go the other mile, give their coat. They will often give people time and, a second chance essentially. But the enemy will pervert that and make you a doormat, to where you just never stand up for yourself. You never call out people for their behavior, because you just feel as if you have this obligation to always be the bigger person. That's a perversion, right? Because even if you read in the New Testament, for example, when the little children came to Jesus and the disciples were like, get away, he was like, no, like, don't send them away, because if you don't become like a little child, you will never even enter into the kingdom of heaven. A lot of people, in terms of trying to keep the peace, would be like, oh, they wouldn't say anything, right? They would be passive, they won't pick a side, because they want to be long-suffering, they want to endure, and they want to tolerate. And it's like, sometimes you have to take a stand for what is right, even if it means that it might be perceived or even is a little divisive, right? And so what I've seen is that if an individual is, again, God-given, they are someone who gives people time and a chance over and over and over, the enemy will then convince that person that they have to basically be a doormat as a normative standard in their reality. They're never supposed to stand up for themselves. They're supposed to let people take advantage of them. That's just how they're supposed to live their life, right? It's a perversion. It is a perversion. It's interesting, because I want to talk about this a little bit, because it's like, yes, you're supposed to go the extra mile. Yes, you're supposed to turn the other cheek, but this is why you have to have discernment, because there also comes a point in time when an individual is blatantly exploiting you to the point where they might even begin to mock God, because they think that you're just someone they can just essentially take advantage of forever. Okay, and there comes a point when it becomes an injustice for you to simply continue to allow that to happen to you. Okay, I'm going to try to use an example right now off the top of my head to corroborate this, because, I always I'll use the example of David and Saul, right? Like, Saul was consistently trying to kill David. David, even though he had the opportunity to kill Saul, didn't. He was being long-suffering. He was choosing to endure being sought after in terms of trying to be killed, instead of trying to take matters to his own hands. But you know what happened to Saul? Saul got killed. Now, this maybe isn't the best example, because I think this is really ultimately an example of God taking vengeance, because it is written, vengeance is mine. But the point is that I think what I'm trying to get at here is that you can't allow the enemy to think that the exploitation that you are experiencing is good. Understand that Saul trying to kill David was not a good thing. David being long-suffering was good, but what he was suffering was not good. Okay, and so what the enemy will try to convince you is that not only is it your job to be long-suffering, but the things that they are doing to you is good. It's righteousness that these people are trying to destroy you. It's righteousness that these people are trying to kill you. And it's like, no, right? I think in the case of long-suffering, it's more of a mental thing. Forgive the background noise, right? It's more of a mental thing, right? Because it's like you're convincing yourself not only that you have to be long-suffering, but you might even begin to convince yourself that what it is you are suffering isn't even bad, right? And that it's just your portion to tolerate these things, which you know are negatively impacting you, but for whatever reason, the enemy convinces you that these things are actually good, and they're not good. They never were, right? And so I guess like the bottom line I want to make is like, be careful when the enemy convinces you to just throw something completely away, because given his perverted nature, again, if you're a generous person and he perverts that generosity into gambling or into overspending, and then you just decide to never spend any money ever, right? Now you've thrown away the generosity. Now you've thrown away the cheerful giving because he perverted it. Or again, if you fell into sexual immorality, or you experienced certain things that God intended to only exist within a marriage, if you experience those things outside of marriage and you realize that they're bad, the enemy might convince you to never experience those things ever. When it's really, it's okay to do X, Y, and Z when you're married. You're not supposed to do it outside, but the enemy will just convince you, throw the whole thing away. Okay, then you wonder why you're miserable, right? Or if you're long suffering, it's like, okay, yes, I'm going to turn the other cheek, be long suffering, but don't convince yourself that what it is you are suffering is a good thing. Don't convince yourself that Saul trying to kill David is like God's plan, when it's like, it is written, touch not my anointed, right? And so I think this honestly just requires a lot of like prayer, discernment, and reflection, as it says in Psalm 4 verse 4, like, sit upon your own bed and be in awe and sin not. Because sometimes you have to understand that, like, what the enemy is trying to tell you to just throw all away, there might be some good that he's also trying to convince you to mix in with the bad and then throw it all away. Because even if you read, I think it's in Matthew 25, I believe, or Matthew 12, the parable of the tares and the wheat. The tares and the wheat grew alongside each other, but God doesn't throw them both away. He separates the tares, throws them into the fire, and then takes the wheat and puts it into his barn. He doesn't say, oh, well, because they were so intertwined, because of proximity, they were so close, they're all bad, right? I mean, seriously, like, when you talk about God's nature, God doesn't just say the good and the bad are together, throw them all away. I mean, you even look at Noah's flood, you look at the story of Lot and his family. God will even take one good person out of the bunch and have mercy upon the good. And so the enemy not being like God, he will see the good and the bad, because he's a pervert, and convince you that it's all bad. Just throw it all away. Can't do that.